You get a text from a friend in crisis. You are completely exhausted. You don't have the emotional bandwidth left today, but you immediately switch into fixer mode.
Yeah.
You craft the perfect supportive response. You manage their crisis, making sure they feel safe. And then you sit in the quiet, feeling completely empty.
It's this really profound, echoing kind of empty.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
the glow of the phone screen just sort of fades, the room goes quiet, and you're left with this heavy silence that follows a performance you didn't even like fully realize you were putting on.
That moment right there, just sitting in the dark, watching the read receipt confirm that you've successfully stabilized someone else's life while yours feels entirely hollow. I mean, that is exactly where we need to start this deep dive.
Absolutely.
Because if you're listening to this and that specific, really visceral scenario feels familiar, well, you already know exactly who you are in your social ecosystem. You're the strong friend, you know? You are the one everyone relies on. You're the emergency contact, the sounding board. You're the mediator who somehow just always knows exactly what to say to de-escalate a conflict.
And society actively, relentlessly praises you for this.
Exactly. They look at you and they're like, you are so mature, you're so incredibly responsible, you're an absolute rock. I mean, people essentially build a pedestal out of your absolute reliability.
They build a pedestal, yeah, and then they just leave you on it.
Right.
And what that cultural praise totally misses, and what we really need to gently observe today, is the hidden reality behind closed doors. Because behind that capability, this person lives in a state of chronic, profound depletion.
Yeah, and we aren't just talking about being tired after a long week at work.
No, not at all.
Huh.
We are talking about an exhaustion that a good night's sleep just does not fix. It's an exhaustion that lives in your bones.
Right.
And what's perhaps most heartbreaking about this is how that depletion bleeds into everything else. I mean, even during moments of supposed joy, like a birthday celebration, or just a quiet evening on a patio with people you genuinely love, there's this hollow, muted numbness.
The volume of life is just permanently turned down.
Exactly. Permanently turned down.
It's such a tragic, maddening irony because you are an absolute master at fixing everyone else's life. I mean, you can look at a friend's messy divorce or a colleague's career crisis and just instantly map out a 10-step emotional survival plan for them.
Right. You're a tactician.
Yeah, you can regulate the temperature of an entire room just by walking into it. But you cannot figure out how to simply rest.
Which is the ultimate trap.
It really is.
Yeah.
If you have a free Sunday afternoon with absolutely nothing on the calendar, your skin crawls, you pace the house, you start organizing a closet that doesn't even need organizing just because stillness feels like an actual threat.
Because to a nervous system wired this way, rest genuinely does feel dangerous. Stillness is the moment you're no longer proving your utility, which means it's the moment you might be abandoned.
And that brings us to the core mission of today's deep dive. We are going to explore why this relentless need to be the fixer, this utter inability to just drop the heavy lifting, it isn't a personality trait.
No, it's not just who you are, even though it totally feels like your entire identity. It is a deeply ingrained survival strategy.
So today we're going to unpack the hidden patterns of hyperindependence, the profound silent weight of unreciprocated friendships, and how learning to correctly identify and set boundaries can finally truly allow you to rest.
It's going to be a heavy one, but a really necessary one.
Yeah. I want to look closely at when you first pick this weight up, because nobody is born a fixer. A baby doesn't come into the world worrying about their mother's stress levels.
Right.
The clinical data from our sources points to a very specific evocative framework for this, which is called the Atlas personality.
Named, of course, after the Titan Atlas from Greek mythology.
Right, the guy holding up the world.
Exactly. Following the war with the Olympians, Zeus condemned Atlas to stand at the western edge of the earth and hold up the sky on his shoulders for eternity. He is the literal load-bearing pillar of the heavens.
It's almost too perfect of a metaphor, because in psychological terms, the Atlas personality describes someone who was obliged to take on adult responsibilities way too early, prematurely.
Yeah, and the literature describes the tragic outcome of this, which is that they grow into an adult who is essentially devoid of fun.
Devoid of fun. That's so sad.
It really is. They literally feel the weight of the world on their shoulders at all times.
Yeah.
They develop this radar-like oversensitivity to the needs of everyone around them, but it's coupled with a complete paralytic inability to assert their own needs.
Okay, so what actually causes that? Like, what's the mechanism?
The clinical mechanism behind how an Atlas personality is forged is known as parentification.
Parentification.
Right. This is the process of role reversal. The child or the adolescent is obliged to support the family system in ways that are developmentally inappropriate and, frankly, overly burdensome.
So instead of the family acting as a container to hold the child becomes the container holding the family.
That's a great way to put it. But what is absolutely vital to understand here from the sources is that parentification breaks down into two distinct types.
Right. There's instrumental parentification and emotional parentification.
Exactly.
So instrumental is the physical, tangible stuff. It's the 9-year-old coming home from school and immediately cooking dinner for the family. It's cleaning the house, managing the grocery budget, or acting as a full-time babysitter for younger siblings because the parents are physically absent or working endlessly or incapacitated by addiction or illness.
Yes. And while that physical burden is immense, it's actually the second type emotional parentification that leaves the deepest psychological scarring.
Really? More than the physical labor.
Yeah, significantly more. Emotional parentification is when a child is forced into the role of a confidant, a mediator, or an emotional anchor for their parents.
Oh, wow.
The parent might sit at the kitchen table and cry to their 10-year-old about their failing marriage, or they might rely on the child to soothe their clinical anxiety, or they might use the child as a human shield against the other parent's explosive anger.
So the child isn't just making dinner. The child is actively managing the adult's internal psychological world.
Exactly.
Right.
Which is an impossible task for a developing brain.
Okay, I'm going to pause here for a second and just push back on behalf of anyone listening who might be feeling a spike of defensiveness right now, especially parents. Because the obvious question here is, isn't it good to teach kids responsibility?
Sure.
Kids should do chores. Kids should learn how to help out. Furthermore, what about a single mother who's working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on? She literally needs her 10-year-old to step up and make mac and cheese for the toddler.
Right, totally.
Are we pathologizing poverty here? Are we calling basic family survival trauma? Where is the actual line?
That is a phenomenal question. And it's crucial we don't pathologize circumstance.
Yeah.
The clinical distinction in the research is very clear on this exact point. It crosses the line from necessary help into destructive parentification based on 2 very specific things.
Which are?
Developmental appropriateness and the presence of emotional scaffolding.
Okay, unpack that for me.
So if a single mother needs her 10-year-old to make dinner, but she comes home, acknowledges the effort, says, I know this is hard. Thank you so much for helping us survive right now. And she still treats that child like a child who needs comfort. That is what we call adaptive.
So the child is helping, but the parent is still fundamentally the parent.
Exactly. The emotional hierarchy is still intact, even if the physical workload is heavy. Destructive parentification occurs when the task is not only overly burdensome, but it happens in an absolute vacuum of emotional support.
Oh, I see.
It's the 10-year-old making the dinner, getting the toddler to bed, and then staying up until midnight, waiting to soothe the mother when she gets home, receiving absolutely no comfort or recognition for the burden they're carrying.
Wow.
The child has essentially lost their natural place in the family unit. They've been robbed of the right to be small, to be needy, and to be protected.
They literally become the emotional load-bearing wall of the house.
Yes, they do.
And the literature highlights some specific variations of this that are they're devastating to read about, like spousification.
Right, spousification.
Yeah.
It's a particularly intense, enmeshed form of emotional parentification. It's when a parent treats a child as a surrogate spouse.
How does that usually play out?
It frequently occurs in families where a partnership is dissolved or is just highly dysfunctional. For example, you might see this with a single mother and a son.
Okay.
The mother, perhaps feeling vulnerable and needing protection, but deeply distrusting adult men, elevates her young son into the role of the primary emotional partner.
So he becomes the man of the house at age 8.
Exactly. He is expected to provide the emotional stabilization, the companionship, and the loyalty that a healthy adult partner normally would.
And we absolutely have to bring in eldest daughter syndrome here because gender and birth order dictates so much of who gets drafted into this role.
Oh, massively.
If there are multiple children, the eldest, particularly the eldest girl, is overwhelmingly the one pushed to the front lines. Sociological data points out that this severely impacts young women's mental health because it ties their fundamental self-worth entirely to caregiving.
Right. Their value becomes synonymous with their utility.
Think about the classic holiday dinner scenario. The eldest daughter is in her 20s. She's managing the turkey in the oven. She's mediating an argument between her uncles. She's quietly checking to make sure her mother isn't getting overwhelmed. And she's cleaning the kitchen. all while her younger siblings are on the couch watching football.
A very familiar scene for a lot of people.
And then years later, at age 30, that same eldest daughter is crying in a bathroom stall at her corporate job because she is entirely burned out from managing her entire team's emotions. She learned at age 7 that her value to the tribe is directly proportional to how much burden she can lift off everyone else.
If you look closely at that eldest daughter or that spouse-ified son, you see a child who realized very early on that to be loved, to be safe, they must be flawlessly useful.
Flawlessly useful.
Yeah. They must be perfectly self-contained and infinitely accommodating. They literally cannot afford to have a bad day.
Which maps perfectly onto how this pattern survives into adulthood. It morphs into this incredibly rigid structure called hyper-independence.
Yes, it does.
And here is where it gets really interesting, because hyper-independence is the ultimate camouflage. It looks amazing from the outside. It looks like fierce capability. It looks like financial independence. It looks like being the boss. But internally, it is a cage.
It's a profound, airtight defense mechanism. Hyper-independence is an excessive reliance on oneself, coupled with a marked, almost phobic reluctance to seek support from others.
A phobic reluctance.
Exactly. And it is deeply intrinsically tied to a concept described by clinical psychologist Dr. Susan Johnson as preemptive abandonment.
Preemptive abandonment. This concept honestly stopped me in my tracks when we were reviewing the sources. It is the subconscious strategy of pushing people away before they even have a chance to leave you.
It's a brilliantly tragic protective strategy. The hyper-independent person's nervous system is constantly anticipating rejection or loss. So to survive that impending doom, they provoke separation.
They strike first.
Yes, they create sudden emotional distance. They pick a fight over absolutely nothing. They ghost. They control the narrative of the abandonment so they don't have to feel the unexpected, helpless pain of it.
I love how you phrase that, controlling the narrative. It's like you're the CEO of your own emotional life, and you are preemptively firing people before they can quit.
Like a perfect analogy.
You are constantly terminating emotional contracts just to maintain absolute control of the situation. You would rather carry 15 bags of groceries from the car in one trip, completely severing the circulation to your fingers, than ask your roommate to come out and help you.
Right, because asking is dangerous.
Because asking for help is an emotional contract. It requires relying on someone else, so you fire them from the job of helping you. And the end result is that you are completely alone in the building. You are safe from being fired yourself, but you are entirely isolated.
And that isolation, that relentless self-containment, is exhausting. These individuals are carrying the weight of all responsibilities, all life decisions, and all emotional labor entirely alone.
They refuse to delegate.
They refuse. They are secretive about their struggles. They mistrust the motives of anyone who actually offers a hand.
Wow.
And crucially, they view neediness in themselves and often in others with absolute visceral disdain.
Wow.
To them, needing someone is a fatal flaw.
If you value conversations like this, you can stay with us here.
Because to truly dismantle this, to understand why a person chooses to carry 15 bags of groceries until their fingers turn blue, we have to look under the hood.
Right, we have to look at the hard science of what this environment does to a developing human being.
Exactly. When a child has to become the caregiver to maintain safety in a volatile or emotionally barren home, they cannot afford to have their own needs. A need is a liability, so they sacrifice their authenticity.
They emotionally disappear. The kid they actually are just vanishes.
They do. And in the place of that authentic child, they construct this high-performing, hyper-vigilant proxy. And what happens neurologically and psychologically during this process is that they internalize what we call a transactional view of love.
Let's really spell that out. A transactional view of love.
It is the deeply buried fundamental belief that you must manufacture peace for others in order to purchase your own safety.
Buy your safety.
Yeah. Love is not a baseline right. It's not freely given. Love is a currency that must be earned through utility. You manage the volatile moods of the adults around you. You fix their problems. You stay perfectly quiet when they're stressed.
Right.
And in exchange for this relentless labor, you are allowed to survive in the household without being attacked, criticized, or abandoned.
And performing that transaction every single day for a decade fundamentally rewires the nervous system. The data is incredibly clear on this. It causes a chronic stress response, constant low-grade cortisol exposure.
Your brain essentially adapts to a baseline of chaos.
Yeah. Your nervous system is constantly scanning the room for subtle tone changes, reading micro expressions on people's faces, trying to fix a mood before it escalates into a disaster. You become an emotional seismograph.
That's exactly it.
So what does this actually mean for the adult walking around today? It means that when things are finally peaceful, when no one is mad, when the house is quiet, when your partner is just sitting on the couch reading a book, stillness feels deeply suspicious.
That is a critical point that is so often misunderstood. Without a problem to solve, without a crisis to manage, the body remains in a state of high alert.
Right, because it's waiting.
Yes, the nervous system doesn't know how to turn off the seismograph. Peace doesn't feel like relief. Peace feels like the terrifying quiet just before the hurricane hits.
So let me ask you this. If your brain is always waiting for the other shoe to drop, if peace feels like a trap, how do you ever actually attach to another human being?
It's incredibly difficult.
I mean, how do you form a relationship, let alone a romantic one, when your neurological baseline is bracing for impact?
This is the exact friction that researchers have been looking to untangle. There's a fascinating comprehensive study that looked at young adults dealing with this specific history, focusing on hyperindependence and a state they termed emotional exile.
Emotional exile.
Right. The researchers used the experiences in close relationship scale to measure how these individuals attach to others. And they found that hyper-independent adults exhibit a highly unusual, incredibly complex blend of insecure attachments.
They score high in two things that, on the surface, seem entirely contradictory.
Precisely. The data shows they redline in both attachment anxiety and attachment avoidance simultaneously.
Okay, we know what these look like on their own, but how does a human nervous system survive being both desperately clingy and completely walled off at the exact same time? What is the actual friction here?
It is agonizing friction.
Mm.
Attachment anxiety is the intense, burning fear of abandonment. It's the voice in your head that says they're going to realize I'm a fraud and leave me.
Okay. And the avoidance?
Attachment avoidance is a deep physical discomfort with closeness. It is the reflex to pull away, to minimize your emotional needs, and to maintain strict independence.
So when these two are operating at the same time, it creates what researchers call an ambivalent dependence.
Exactly. So they are terrified of being left, but they're also terrified of letting anyone close enough to stay.
That sounds exhausting. They are caught in a trap between a desperate, hidden, starving desire for connection and a profound survival-level mistrust of it.
Yes. So outwardly, they present as fiercely independent. That's the avoidant part, managing the PR, basically saying, I don't need anyone, I'm perfectly fine on my own.
Right.
But internally, they are plagued by the fear that if they do let someone in, if they do show a crack in the armor, that person will eventually abandon them. And that's the anxious part screaming in the basement.
And the glue holding this intensely painful paradox together, the thing that keeps the whole structure from collapsing, is internalized shame.
Yes. The regression analysis in the study showed that internalized shame was the single most significant predictor of hyper-independent behaviors.
Wow.
We had to translate what that data point actually means for a person's daily life, because this isn't just about liking to do things alone because you're an introvert. It's not just a preference.
No.
Hyper-independence is a defensive shield. It is a way to protect against deep-seated, agonizing feelings of being fundamentally flawed, unworthy, or inherently unlovable.
What that data point means for you is that when you cancel plans on a Friday night and tell your friends you're just too busy or too tired, you aren't actually busy. You're hiding.
You're hiding.
You are hiding because if you let someone close, they might see the flaws, they might see the exhaustion, they might see the scared kid behind the competent adult mask. So the independence isn't true freedom. It's a fortress built out of shame.
It is. And inside that fortress, as described by trauma therapist Annie Wright, live what she brilliantly terms the four exiled self.
The four exiled selves. These are the vulnerable, needy parts of us that we essentially lock away in the basement to maintain our fortress of isolation.
Right.
We banish them because if we acknowledge them, we feel weak. And we learned in childhood that weakness equals danger. We exile our need for comfort. We exile our need for rest. We exile our need to be physically held. We exile our need to simply not know the answer and have someone else figure it out.
And Wright makes a vital distinction here between this kind of isolation and true self-sufficiency. Because society looks at the hyper-independent person and says, wow, they're so self-sufficient, they never need a favor.
Right, they look like superhumans.
But they aren't self-sufficient at all. They're just starving in private. True self-sufficiency is what she calls terra firma.
Terra firma, solid ground.
Solid ground. True self-sufficiency is a grounded sense of self that has the capacity to manage life's challenges, absolutely, but can also rest safely in connection with others. It allows for interdependence.
Which is the goal.
Exactly. Isolation, which is what hyper-independence really is a lonely cage where you're cut off from the very support systems that could provide safety, co-regulation, and repair.
Okay, so we've mapped out the internal architecture, the shame, the exhaustion, the exiled selves in the basement. Now I want to look at how this internal architecture manifests in the real world, like on a Tuesday afternoon.
Let's do it.
How does this dictate your social life? Let's talk about friendships, because this pattern creates a very specific, incredibly draining dynamic. It's described in the literature as the one-sided friendship.
Yes, and what's fascinating here is that the clinical observations are careful to point out that these aren't necessarily explosive, toxic friendships.
Yeah.
They aren't filled with dramatic betrayals or screaming matches.
It's not a movie villain friendship. It's that low-grade, persistent sense of emptiness. It's the scenario where you meet a friend for coffee. You sit there and listen to them vent about their job for an entire hour. You offer perfect, nuanced advice. You remember the names of all their awful coworkers. You ask incredibly thoughtful follow-up questions about their mother's health. And then the coffee is over. You pay the bill, you hug goodbye, and you realize they never once asked how you're doing. Not once.
Yeah.
And you walk to your car feeling just hollow.
And that hollowness is perfectly explained by social exchange theory.
That's it.
This psychological theory posits that human beings evaluate their relationships based on perceived social costs and rewards. In a healthy reciprocal friendship, the rewards like support, validation, shared joy, feeling seen, they roughly balance out the effort and time required to maintain the connection.
But in a one-sided friendship, for an Atlas personality, that scale is entirely broken.
Completely smashed. One person takes on virtually all of the invisible emotional labor.
Invisible emotional labor.
And that term is key here. Invisible emotional labor means remembering the birthdays, providing the reassurance, constantly initiating the contact, and crucially, constantly regulating your own disappointment to keep the friendship smooth.
So you're managing your own hurt so they don't have to deal with it.
Exactly. You are doing all the heavy lifting to maintain the bridge between you, and the other person is simply walking across it whenever they feel like it.
And there is a neurological fact about this dynamic from the sources that is honestly staggering. When you are in a relationship where you consistently feel ignored, unseen, or emotionally unimportant, it doesn't just hurt your feelings, it actually activates the anterior cingulate cortex in the brain.
Which is the exact same brain region associated with processing physical pain.
Physical pain. Your brain is registering this one-sided friendship, this emotional absence, the exact same way it registers a physical injury, like touching a hot stove or breaking a finger.
Yes.
But because the injury is ambiguous, because your friend isn't yelling at you, they aren't actively insulting you, they're just oblivious or deeply self-centered, your nervous system doesn't have a clear target to confront.
And that ambiguity is what makes it uniquely exhausting.
Right.
When a loss is clear, you can grieve it. When someone is overtly cruel, you can get angry, set a hard boundary, and leave.
It's defined.
Right. But when a friendship technically exists, when they still text you emojis and invite you to group dinners, but they're just emotionally absent one-on-one, your brain struggles to make sense of the pain it's registering.
Yeah.
So you start to question your own reality. You wonder, am I asking too much? Are they just going through a busy season? Am I being overly sensitive?
And because you are an Atlas personality, because your default setting is hyper-independence, you always turn the blame inward.
Always.
You think, well, I shouldn't need them to ask about me anyway. I'm fine. I don't need the validation. You literally shrink your own needs to preserve the connection, even if the connection is actively starving you.
Which brings us to how this exact pattern infects romantic relationships.
Right. Let's go there.
Because the dynamic is very similar, but usually with much higher stakes. The hyper-independent individual, whose nervous system is wired for a baseline of chaos, often attracts, or is deeply magnetically attracted to, partners who are broken, chaotic, or need fixing.
But why? I mean, if they're already so exhausted from carrying the world, why do they actively walk toward the fire in their romantic lives?
Because the fire's familiar.
Ah.
And to a traumatized nervous system, familiarity always feels safer than stability. A stable, secure partner who shows up on time, who communicates clearly, and who says, "You look tired. Let me take care of you tonight." That feels profoundly terrifying. It immediately triggers that attachment avoidance we discussed earlier.
I have to challenge this, though. Are you saying that a person who desperately wants to be loved will actively, consciously push away the exact people who offer genuine, healthy support? Don't we all just want peace?
We want peace logically,
Yeah.
but neurologically, it's a different story.
Okay.
Yes, they will push away the healthy support. Remember the transactional view of love. If a hyper-independent person isn't fixing a partner, they don't know what their value is in the relationship.
They feel useless.
Exactly. If the partner doesn't actively need them to survive, the hyper-independent person's brain sounds an alarm. It says, I am useless here, therefore I'm about to be abandoned.
Wow.
Furthermore, to receive genuine love and support requires vulnerability. It requires letting those four exiled selves out of the basement. You have to admit you are tired. You have to admit you need comfort. And the brain perceives that vulnerability not as love, but as an intolerable, life-threatening risk to their safety.
It is a heartbreaking, self-fulfilling prophecy of loneliness. You attract chaos because you know exactly how to manage it, and you reject peace because you literally do not know how to survive in it.
Perfectly said.
Dating just becomes a minefield where the red flags look like home and the green flags look like traps. There are more people thinking about this than you might expect.
And that is exactly why we need to move to the reframe. We have mapped out the trap, now we need to look at how to dismantle it.
Yes. And the very first step of the reframe, the absolute foundation of healing this, is removing the shame.
Crucial step.
If you are listening to this right now and recognizing yourself in the Atlas personality, in the one-sided friendships, in the sheer exhaustion of holding up the sky, we need to explicitly state this. This is a trauma response.
It is not a character flaw. It is not a failure of willpower. It is not because you are fundamentally broken.
This exhaustion, this inability to rest, it is a brilliant adaptation.
Absolutely.
When you were a child in a chaotic, neglectful, or overwhelming environment, becoming hyper-independent, reading the room, fixing the adults, that kept you safe. It was a genius strategy for survival. Your brain did exactly what it was supposed to do to keep you alive.
But the profound tragedy of childhood trauma is that the survival strategies that once protected a child eventually crystallize into the invisible bars of an adult psychological prison.
What saved you then is suffocating you now.
Yes.
So how do we break the bars? How do we actually take off the mask? The clinical data gives us a really incredible, concrete look at this through a qualitative study published in the Psychology of Women journal. The researchers studied women who were actively healing from familial emotional abuse, specifically looking at the friction and strategies of boundary setting.
It's a vital study because it moves us from abstract psychological theory into daily practice.
Right, the actual how-to.
And the researchers identified 3 distinct categories of boundary setting that these women utilized in their healing journey.
Okay, let's go through them deeply. Category 1 is reclaiming autonomy.
Reclaiming autonomy is about establishing physical and decision-making independence. The study participants described asserting personal space in ways they never had before.
Like what?
Like refusing unannounced visits from family members or physically removing themselves from toxic environments instead of staying to mediate the conflict. They also focused heavily on decision-making independence, which meant making significant life choices without consulting the family system that previously controlled their every move.
And a huge part of this category in the research was reclaiming body autonomy, refusing an unwanted hug, saying, no, I don't want to be touched right now.
Huge step.
Right, because for someone whose entire existence was dedicated to accommodating the physical and emotional space of others, saying no to a hug feels like a revolution.
Oh, absolutely.
But let's explain the friction here. Why does something as simple as saying no to a hug cause a hyper-independent person to feel a massive spike in cortisol?
Because their nervous system still believes that accommodation equals survival. When they say no, the brain sounds an alarm that says, you are withholding your utility, you are displeasing the tribe, you're going to be cast out.
It feels like life or death.
It literally does. The physical sensation of guilt that rushes in is literally the body trying to force the boundary back down to ensure survival. Learning to sit with that cortisol spike, to let the guilt wash over you without changing your boundary, is the actual work of reclaiming autonomy.
It's like selectively closing doors in a house that used to be completely open to the public. People might bang on the closed doors and it will be noisy and terrifying, but you are finally giving yourself a private room.
That's a brilliant analogy. I love that. The second category the researchers found is restructuring familial relationships. This is where the tactical, day-to-day management of the relationship happens.
Right. This involves things like limiting contact, keeping phone calls to 10 minutes instead of an hour. But the concept I found most powerful here is selective disclosure.
Selective disclosure is huge.
It means actively choosing what not to share. You stop giving a dysfunctional family ammunition. You stop telling them about your dating life or your job promotion or your financial struggles because you know from a lifetime of evidence that they will either criticize it, sabotage it, or somehow make it entirely about them.
And within this restructuring is the critical enforcement of consequences.
Right, because a boundary without a consequence is just a suggestion.
Precisely. If a boundary is violated, say, a parent starts criticizing your weight or your spouse after you've asked them to stop, there has to be a result. Often, the participants reported using silence, ending the phone call, or physical distance as a consequence.
You just step out of the ring.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is the act of stepping out of the argument entirely. You stop trying to convince them to understand you.
Which leads to the third category, which is arguably the hardest one of all: emotional self-preservation.
This is the internal work. You can set all the physical boundaries in the world, you can close all the doors in a house, but if you're sitting inside your private room, consumed by crushing guilt, the boundary won't hold.
Yeah.
Emotional self-preservation involves actively detaching from internalized guilt. It is the profound realization that the family's dysfunction, their unhappiness, their chaos, is not your responsibility to carry.
And it involves reframing the abuse narrative. The researchers noted that participants had to look back at their history and clearly state, control is not love. What they did was not care, it was manipulation.
Right.
Naming it correctly is what strips it of its power. If you continue to call manipulation love, you will always feel guilty for walking away from it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this boundary work isn't just about managing a difficult Sunday dinner. It is about interrupting deep, ancient intergenerational patterns.
Let's talk about that.
The literature delves into the mechanisms of intergenerational trauma, specifically focusing on a concept called projective identification.
Okay, this sounds incredibly dense, but it is so important based on the sources. Let's really unpack the mechanism of projective identification. Let's look at how this happens on a normal Tuesday morning at the breakfast table.
Sure, projective identification is an unconscious psychological mechanism where traumatized parents literally make their children receptacles for their own unresolved distress.
Receptacles.
Yeah. Let's take your breakfast table scenario.
Mm.
A mother is standing at the sink. She has profound, unhealed trauma regarding her own self-worth and a deep, unacknowledged well of anxiety. She doesn't say a word about it, but she sighs heavily, she bangs the dishes, she radiates a frantic, jagged energy.
I think we all know that energy.
Right. She is unconsciously projecting her internal chaos outward because she cannot tolerate it herself.
She is dumping her unhealed wounds into the room.
Exactly. And the child sitting at the table, whose literal biological survival depends on staying attached to this mother, introjects those projections.
Introjects them, like absorbs them.
The child internalizes that jagged energy. The child begins to calibrate their entire personality to fix the sigh at the sink.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
They become hypervigilant, perfectly quiet, endlessly helpful. They unconsciously conform their behaviors to carry the parent's pain so the parent doesn't have to.
The clinical observations reference this incredible concept by psychoanalyst Doris Brothers regarding trauma. She defines trauma as the shattering of what she calls systemically emergent certainties, or SECs.
Yes.
Basically, trauma shatters your fundamental bedrock belief that the world is safe, predictable, and manageable. And when a parent's SECs are shattered by their own trauma, they desperately search for certainty. They search for sameness.
And that desperate search for sameness creates enmeshment.
Right.
The traumatized parent cannot tolerate the child being a separate, distinct individual with their own needs, their own boundaries, and their own differing opinions. Because difference creates unpredictability, and unpredictability is terrifying to a shattered nervous system.
So the boundaries just blur completely.
Yes. The child identity is swallowed by the parent's need for a merged, completely predictable emotional environment.
The most poignant, really heartbreaking example of this in the literature is the memorial candle children.
Oh, yes.
These are the offspring of Holocaust survivors. The research shows that these children often completely suppress their own developmental needs, their own anger, their own individual identities in order to become a source of pure joy and compensation for their parents' unimaginable suffering.
It's an incredible burden.
They intuitively understand the horror their parents survived, and they decide, consciously or unconsciously, I will never add a single ounce of pain to your life. They literally try to absorb the grief of the generation before them to save their parents from further suffering.
It is the ultimate tragic expression of the Atlas personality,
Hmm.
taking on a weight that does not belong to you out of a profound, desperate sense of love and duty.
Yeah.
But as the literature makes painfully clear, this does not actually heal the parent's trauma, and it effectively destroys the child's chance at an authentic life.
Which brings us to the ultimate goal, the destination of this entire deep dive. If hyperindependence is the cage, if projective identification is the lock, and boundary setting is the key, what does freedom actually look like?
Freedom is true interdependence.
Interdependence.
It is the realization that healing requires completely abandoning the urge to fix yourself and others. That pathological urge to fix is just a symptom of the wound.
Right.
Interdependence is the courage to stand in the terra firma we discussed earlier, to be securely grounded in your own identity, your own body, and your own needs, while allowing yourself to need and be needed by others in a healthy, reciprocal way.
It is the profound courage required to let the mask finally shatter, to stop performing capability for an audience that isn't even paying attention, to turn inward, to look at that exhausted, exiled inner child, the one who has been holding up the sky since they were 7 years old, standing at the kitchen sink trying to fix a sigh, and finally become the protector they needed back then. To look at them and tell them, with absolute certainty, that they can put the sky down, that they no longer have to hold the world together to be worthy of standing in it. If this conversation felt true for you, you're always welcome here. You can subscribe to Leone Patterns and continue with us.
As we close, let's just gently ground ourselves in what we've explored today. We looked at the heavy armor of the Alice personality, forged in the silent fires of childhood parentification. We examined the neurobiology of a nervous system wired for chaos, and the invisible, agonizing emotional labor that drains the life out of one-sided relationships. And finally, we look at the quiet, profound courage it takes to set boundaries, to detach from the suffocating grip of guilt, and to step out of emotional exile into true, grounded interdependence.
Think about the space you create for everyone else in your life. Think about the patience, the grace, the infinite, exhausting accommodations you make every single day to ensure that everyone around you feels safe, regulated, and heard. What would happen if, just for a moment, you allowed yourself to occupy that same space, completely unmasked? Same pace, same questions. See you then.